How far will someone go to deny the truth? The classroom was eerily silent. 17-year-old Jade Williams sat frozen at her desk, her fingers gripping the edges of her graded test paper. A bold, red 100% was written across the top. It should have been a moment of pride, but instead, every pair of eyes in the room seemed to burn into her skin. At the front of the classroom, Mr. Thomas Reynolds, the AP Calculus teacher, stood motionless, his brow furrowed, his mouth pressed into a thin line. He tapped his marker against the whiteboard, his disbelief evident. "This," he said, holding up Jade's test, "is impossible." A few students exchanged amused glances, while others simply looked confused. Jade's stomach twisted. She had always known that Mr. Reynolds never truly acknowledged her intelligence. He reserved his praise for students like Logan Carter and Emma Sinclair, the wealthy, well-connected white kids. But she never thought he would outright accuse her. "What do you mean impossible?" she asked, keeping her voice even. Mr. Reynolds folded his arms, his expression skeptical. "No one in this class has ever scored a perfect 100 on my advanced test. And then you," he hesitated, eyeing her as if she didn't belong. "You somehow managed to outperform everyone, and by such a wide margin." Murmurs spread across the room. Jade swallowed hard. "I studied. You gave us the review sheet, and I don't believe it," Reynolds interrupted, his tone sharper now. "There's no way you earned this score fairly." A gasp rippled through the class. Logan let out a chuckle, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. Emma covered her mouth as if scandalized, but her barely hidden smirk told another story. Jade clenched her fists. "Are you accusing me of cheating?" "I am." The words landed like a slap. Laughter erupted from Logan's side of the room. Jade felt the heat rise to her face. "That's not true. I've always been good at math. I work for this." Reynolds waved her test in the air. "Then prove it. Show me your notes." Jade hesitated. I don't have them. I did most of the work in my head." Reynolds scoffed. "Oh, so you just magically solved college-level calculus in your head?" "I don't think so." He turned to the class. "If she truly understands this material, she should be able to rework these problems right now." More murmurs spread. Some students looked at her with pity. Others, like Logan, smirked, waiting for her to fail. Reynolds slapped a blank sheet of paper onto her desk. "Go on, show us." Jade stared at the paper. She knew she could solve the problems again, but that wasn't the point. No one else was being treated like this. Lifting her chin, she asked, "Why don't you make Logan or Emma redo their answers?" Reynolds' expression darkened. "They didn't score a perfect 100. You did." Jade's pulse pounded in her ears. "Or maybe," she said slowly, her voice steady, "you just don't believe a black girl can be smarter than your favorite students." A suffocating silence settled over the room. Reynolds' jaw clenched, his face reddening. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Jade said, refusing to back down. "You never call on me in class. You never acknowledge my answers. But now that I've outperformed everyone, suddenly I must be a cheater." A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged nervous glances. Reynolds sneered. "I don't care what ridiculous excuses you're making. I'm reporting this to the principal." He snatched her test paper, crumpling it in his fist. "Your grade is invalid." Jade's chest tightened. "This isn't fair. Life isn't fair," Reynolds snapped. Just then, the classroom door swung open. Principal Daniel Harrington, a tall, sharp-eyed man in his late 50s, stepped inside. His gaze swept over the tense room before landing on Reynolds. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his tone measured, "I'd like to have a word with you." "Now, could it really end like this?" Jade Williams stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as Principal Daniel Harrington's piercing gaze settled on her. The whispers around the classroom faded into silence, all eyes now fixated on the tense moment unfolding before them. "Miss Williams," Harrington said, his deep voice steady, "could you come with me?" Jade swallowed hard. She could still feel the humiliation burning through her from just moments ago. Mr. Thomas Reynolds accusing her of cheating, tearing her achievement apart in front of the entire class. Now she was being called out again. Her legs felt weak as she grabbed her bag and slowly stood. Logan Carter snickered from his seat in the back, exchanging smirks with Emma Sinclair. They were enjoying this. But Jade had no choice. She had to follow Principal Harrington out of the room. The hallway outside Ridgewood High School's classroom was eerily quiet compared to the chaos inside her mind. Jade's breath hitched as she noticed Ms. Rodriguez, the school's guidance counselor, standing beside a rolling cart with a laptop perched on top. The screen was paused on a grainy black and white security feed. Principal Harrington turned to Jade. "Do you know what this is?" Jade nodded slowly. "The classroom CCTV footage." Without another word, Harrington pressed play. Jade's eyes widened as the footage unfolded before her. It showed Mr. Reynolds earlier that morning, sitting at his desk, flipping through the stack of graded tests. When he reached hers, his expression changed. He stared at the paper for an uncomfortably long time, his lips moving, as if he were muttering to himself. Then suddenly his jaw clenched, and he slammed the paper down. Moments before returning the tests, he had pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and shook his head in frustration. "There's no way in hell she's that smart." His voice was faint but unmistakable in the recording. Jade's fists clenched. Harrington exhaled through his nose. "We've been reviewing past footage, too, Jade. This isn't the first time he's done something like this." Ms. Rodriguez looked at her with quiet sympathy. "We're taking this very seriously. You are not in trouble, but Mr. Reynolds is." At that moment, the classroom door burst open behind them. Reynolds stormed out, his face red with frustration. "This is ridiculous. That footage doesn't mean anything." Harrington turned to face him. "It means everything," Reynolds scoffed. "So what? You're going to believe this little girl over me?" Harrington's face darkened. "No, I'm believing the evidence." He took a step forward. "Mr. Reynolds, you are officially suspended, effective immediately." Reynolds' mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. You will collect your belongings and leave the premises now." A tense silence filled the air. Jade noticed the two security officers standing at the far end of the hallway, ready to escort Reynolds out. His eyes darted around, searching for support. No one spoke. No one came to his defense. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he turned and stomped away. Jade let out a shaky breath. Harrington turned to her, a small smile appearing on his normally stern face. "And you, Miss Williams, have just earned yourself a full-ride scholarship." Jade's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Harrington nodded. "We reached out to several academic organizations. They were very impressed with your resilience and your talent." Her heart pounded in disbelief. This wasn't just justice. This was karma coming full circle. WY lunchtime. The news had spread like wildfire. Ridgewood High School was buzzing with the downfall of Mr. Reynolds and the rise of Jade Williams. Some students were stunned. Others whispered that they weren't surprised. But one thing was certain. Jade was no longer just another student. She was a name that people wouldn't forget. Sitting at her usual cafeteria table, she scrolled through her phone, reading the flood of messages pouring in. "Congrats, girl. You showed him. You deserve that scholarship." "Damn, I knew Reynolds was biased, but this is wild." Not everyone was thrilled, though. Across the cafeteria, Logan Carter and Emma Sinclair sat with their usual group, whispering and casting glances in her direction. Finally, Logan stood up. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to silence the chatter at his table. "Biggest scam of the year." Jade sighed, putting her phone down. She wasn't in the mood for his nonsense. But Logan wasn't done. He turned toward her. "Yo, Jade," he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell us, how does it feel to play the victim and get rewarded for it?" A few gasps echoed around the cafeteria. Jade clenched her jaw, then slowly stood up. She locked eyes with Logan. "The only person who got exposed here was Mr. Reynolds," she said coldly. "I worked hard for that test, and I earned my grade. Just because you couldn't beat me doesn't mean I cheated." Logan's smirk twitched. "Please. We all know you got lucky." Jade raised an eyebrow. "Lucky?" She took a step closer. "Tell me, Logan, where was my luck when Reynolds ignored me every time I raised my hand? Where was my luck when I had to study twice as hard just to get noticed?" She narrowed her eyes. "Or are you just mad that a black girl outsmarted you?" The cafeteria went dead silent. Logan's face burned red. "You're pathetic," he muttered before storming off. Emma scoffed and followed him. Jade let out a breath, shaking her head. A few students clapped. Others gave her nods of approval. But she didn't need their validation. She had already won. The next morning, Principal Harrington stood in front of a packed auditorium. Students, teachers, and even a few parents filled the seats, waiting. Yesterday, he began, Mr. Reynolds was suspended after evidence confirmed a pattern of discrimination in his classroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But this is bigger than one teacher. It's about the culture we allow in our schools. And let me be clear, Ridgewood High will never be a place where students are judged by anything other than their abilities. Jade's heart pounded as Harrington turned toward her. Miss Williams, please stand. She hesitated, then slowly rose. I want every student here to know, Harrington continued. Jade didn't just fight for herself. She fought for fairness. And because of her courage, real change is happening. Applause erupted. Jade's eyes stung, but she blinked back the emotion. For her excellence and resilience, Harrington announced, I'm proud to confirm that she has received a full academic scholarship to any university of her choice. The cheers shook the auditorium. Jade covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Harrington smiled warmly. Congratulations, Miss Williams. You've earned this. Jade Williams stood her ground, eyes locked with Logan Carter. Tell us, Jade, he sneered, arms crossed. How does it feel to play the victim and get rewarded for it? Murmurs spread through the cafeteria. Jade exhaled, steady. I earned my grade, she said. Just because you couldn't beat me doesn't mean I cheated. Logan scoffed. We all know you got lucky. Lucky. Jade stepped closer. Where was my luck when Mr. Reynolds ignored me every time I raised my hand? When I had to study twice as hard to get noticed? Her voice sharpened. Or are you just mad a black girl outsmarted you? Silence. Logan's face flushed. You're pathetic, he muttered before storming off. Applause followed, but Jade didn't need it. She had already won. The next morning, Ridgewood High's auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Principal Harrington stepped forward. Yesterday, Mr. Reynolds was suspended for discrimination, he announced. But this is bigger than one teacher. This is about ensuring fairness for every student. He turned to Jade. Miss Williams, please stand. Jade's heart pounded as she rose. For her resilience and excellence, I'm proud to announce that Jade has received a full academic scholarship. Cheers erupted. Some students stood. Teachers wiped their eyes. Jade's chest swelled. Reynolds had tried to break her, but instead, she stood taller than ever. Justice had been served, and this was only the beginning.